Okay, homophones. Many of you know what these are. Especially if you sort of work it through, homo meaning the same, right? Homo sapien, homosocial bonding is bonding from people in the same gender. And then phones has to do with phonetics, has to do with sounds. So sounds the same. So yeah, so these are words that are spelled differently, but sound the same. So let's go over some examples. Very common example. We're going to do a separate video on most of these, not all of these. But I just want to go over these regardless. So principle and principle, because there are many different types of principles, LE and AL. Principles. So we'll go over one example. So he lives his life by two main beliefs or principles. Do good and forgive. Could be anything though, right? It could be do good and be patient. It could be, it could be smile and forgive. So yeah. So let's do. So yeah. So principles. This is going to be LES. Principles. So I kind of think of like LES. It reminds me of like rules, right? So the word rules has LES, and then principles are kind of like rules. So that also ends with LES. So just little mnemonic devices, like little memory devices, as you learn at any age, I think is really valuable. So that's one thing that I've learned is to try not to just go through the material, but to try to like stop yourself and see if you can't find some hooks, some memory hooks, so that you can kind of remember this stuff. Also, just a lot of exposure and practice is helpful as well. But being patient with the learning process is paramount because it is a process. It's like any relationship. Teaming up with a business partner or teaming up in a in a relationship or a marriage. Anything that takes a long time. Obviously, there's a process, right? You have to sort of let it unfold. It can't just be sort of rushed, and you can't go to the end zone before you get to the first yard. The first yard. So let's do principles. So the two principles of the company started selling their first product 5 years ago in their garage. So principles. So and although there are different meanings of LE and AL, these are two specific examples. So principles in this context means co-founders of a company, or owners or co-owners of a company. So, and then here, so what helped me remember this when I was learning it was that they're pals, right? They're friends. So they're human beings, right? Human beings can be pals. So they're pals. So they're the two principles of the company. So good mnemonic devices. Okay, let's do a few more. Let's do allowed and allowed. Also two homophones, right? They're spelled differently, but they're spelled differently, but they sound the same. So kids weren't allowed to go there after dark. loud. And then she read to her kids aloud when they were young in order to instill in them an early love of reading. Okay. Now here, even though reading is kind of repetitive in terms of read, I guess I could say like reading and learning. Um, it might actually be better since even though they sound different. It's a little different than a homophone, right? These look the same, R-E-A-D-R, but they sound differently. Is maybe to add something. So you could say reading and learning, or what might be better, an early uh, curiosity and love of learning. Right? So you could say an early curiosity or early curiousness and love of learning. And love of reading, rather. I think that sounds a little bit better. I think it's still fine with just reading, but I just think it sounds a little bit better to have a little bit of sort of another block here, another little text block here. It just sounds like it flows a little better. So aloud. Okay, so here's a little hint on aloud. O-U-D is, you can probably see it too, right? So is that the word loud is in it. So and it's speaking or reading, aloud. So you can, right? You can speak loudly, or read loudly, or shout loudly. I'm sure the word shout emphasizes that it's loud already, but so that might be a little bit redundant. But these are all things that you can do with your mouth, and they have to do with emoting and expressing sounds, right? So you can express sounds with your mouth loudly. So that's why hopefully you can help you remember aloud, O-U-D, when you're talking about reading to your kids aloud. Or she spoke, she gave the speech aloud to her class, yesterday morning, etc. As opposed to aloud, O-W-E-D. Okay, let's do another one. Hanger and hanger. So the student, the flying student, the probably aviation, right? Aviation, I think that's a little bit more formal, a little bit more appropriate for the venue, right? Always remember the venue. And, be aware of the language used in this venue. The aviation student, sort of the common language. The aviation student, as opposed to flying student, the aviation student met with his instructor at the downtown hangar this morning, 7 a.m. So you can say this morning, 7 a.m. You could say at 7 a.m. The most sort of grammatically correct would be at, right? At 7 a.m. this morning. But we have sort of truncated this stuff, some of these prepositions you know, to improve flow, you know, in terms of that. But I think at definitely fits the best. So let's highlight this. Correct here. Underline this. These are our sentences that we're going to use. Spelled correctly. Kids weren't allowed to go there after dark. L-O-W-E-D. And then she read to her kids aloud. And then the aviation student met with his instructor at the downtown hangar at 7 a.m. this morning. So the hangar and how I try to remember this, you know, if I was going to use first of all, it's less common, you know, the word hanger versus hanger, right? Because most people use hangers, you know, and interact with them daily, right? And the most obvious spelling would probably be, right, depending on the person, but probably be H-A-N-G-E-R, right, versus H-A-N-G-A-R, because ER verbs or ER words are much more common than AR words. I mean, it might be my cursory analysis, but I believe that that's the case. That definitely, I think hangers probably use a lot more than hanger with the AR. So that's how I could remember. Another way to remember is that H-A-N-G-A-R is a word spelled similarly to air, like, you know, aircraft, you know, airplane, airline, etc. Right. So that's another hint. So these are just hints. You know, just ways to remember. You know, so whenever you learn something new, you know, you want to maybe see, just kind of think through that. And obviously, exposure is everything, right? Reading a lot, writing a lot, you know, like using the words when you're writing, obviously, right? Like practice, and you know, for your assignments and just on the side, etc. So, and then let's see, let's do a last one, which is hanger. He couldn't find a single hanger in his closet this morning. Now, how would you want to make it clearer? Because he probably does have hangers, right? They're probably hangers, because these hangers are probably, he probably has clothes in his closet that are hung up by hangers. But what's the adjective here? Available hanger. Yeah, I couldn't find a single available hanger in his closet this morning. So you want to make it super clear, right? Like that's kind of what one of our thesis statements is. You want to be as clear as possible, yet make the reader work a little bit. Since his, right, a wardrobe is basically a person's totality of clothes that they own, right? And I don't want to sound like materialist. I don't really care too much about wardrobes, but that's sort of what it is. He couldn't find a single available hanger in his closet since his wardrobe, you know, was busting at the seams. And this is sort of a cliche, so you might not want to use it unless you say something funny like "no pun intended," or you could say "pun intended." Right, the seams, so your clothes and all that stuff. Right, his wardrobe was busting at the seams, and so which implies that he has a lot of clothes like hung up in his closet. And like you don't want to say closet wardrobe or his wardrobe in his closet because you're being repetitive, right? So you want to go back to like being as clear as you can, but not being repetitive and not and trying to use the minimal number of words which allows the reader to truly understand what you're saying without being boring, right? So don't be repetitive or boring. Kiss of death when it comes to writing. So he couldn't find a single available hanger in his closet this morning since his wardrobe was busting at the seams, pun intended. So you could change this to was already busting at the seams. Yeah, which kind of implies that it also hints that the word already hints that, so you could say this, the word already hints that he is still buying clothes, right? New clothes. So that one word can help the reader. It sort of evokes the reader's inquisitiveness. I know it would invoke mine. That like, hey, this person really knows how to write because these little decisions that I think a good clear writer makes. I think it makes a big difference. So he couldn't find a single available because like you could say a single hanger in his closet, but that's like we can and then since his wardrobe is already busting at the seams, pun intended. I mean, it implies that there are no hangers in there. So then you're thinking, oh, where are the clothes then? The clothes are in the wardrobe. Like you want to think about the reader. You literally want to always think about the reader. It's not about you. It's about the reader. Um, will they be confused? How can my writing clarify any potential confusion, and that's where you want to fix. You want to change that. So when you say available, like you could say open hanger. I think that's probably the other. But then it's also a little bit confusing too because you're like, oh well, open hanger. When you picture like a hanger, like an airline hanger, that's a common phrase, right? So if there's a common phrase that it makes someone connect to a different spelling of the word, then you don't want to use that, right? Because if it's like, oh yeah, I went down to the airport and I walked into the open hangar, like that's something that is probably commonplace in that, when you're describing that sort of realm. But now you have a different one, a different spelling, a different meaning, which is the hanger that you hang your clothes on, obviously. You want to change that word. You want to change that choice, right? So you're like, okay, he couldn't find a single available hanger in his closet this morning since his wardrobe was already busting at the seams, pun intended. So it's kind of cute, kind of silly. We'll go over busting at the seams and some more of these cliches, in subsequent videos. But right now, hopefully, this is a little bit helpful for homophones and doing a little bit of discussion on sort of how to put these sentences together and what sounds good and what clarifies and what might confuse. So let's do our last one. Let's do Hall, like Learnhall, hint hint, and let's do Hall. Okay, so you know, so it's like it's Learnhall meaning like a hall of learning or whatever, and then like like the hall, like if you get a hall pass in school, so it's mostly like the halls of justice, right? So you could say but the halls of justice is kind of a cliche. You don't want to overuse them. You only use them once in a blue moon, especially in sort of more conversational sort of writing. This would fit in more of like a narrative, right? Which kind of fits because you're describing sort of a character or a person and talking about a single hanger in his closet. And then also, you can also hear this person talking in this way. I couldn't find a single available hanger in my closet this morning. Like, it's kind of funny because, you're sort of describing how a person might talk. So I think it makes it even more connective. Allows the reader to connect more with sort of the narrative aspect of this writing. So, having busting at the seams, a cliche, having like this funny, it's very conversational. It's almost a little bit, it's not silly, but definitely a little bit more um, fun and, and less sort of stuffy. So yeah, so you could say we passed through the um, the the many museum halls in order to get to the the Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit. Actually, Frank Lloyd Wright was an architect. I mean, I guess you could have a Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit because you could have pictures of, but it's probably more going to be like an actual painter. So you could say something like the the Monet exhibit. In order to get, and then you might want to add to this. You might want to say something like, which we thought was the the crowning. You could say something like the crown jewel, which is still cliche-ish. The crown jewel, and we don't want to use them too much. But I think it's all right here. We pass through the many museum halls in order to get to the crown jewel of the, of the Getty Museum. Now you're seeing what I should change, right? Hopefully, the 1A exhibit. Okay, is we could change museum. We want to delete this, and then you also want to, maybe even add a descriptor here. Maybe even add like an adjective. The many, sort of sprawling halls, or sort of not necessarily, but if it like serpentine, that's a little bit, like serpentine halls. I think it might fit better if you say something like winding halls. So you want it to be sort of less unwieldy as a word, less obnoxious as a word. But it depends on the meaning that you're looking for. It depends on sort of what you're going for, right? What you're trying to evoke in the reader. We pass through the. I think this fits though. We pass through the many winding halls. We can just say many. We pass through many winding halls in order to get to the crown jewel. Because you say the many winding halls, it's implying that you walk through every single one, right? Because it's the many winding. It implies all of them. But when you go through a museum, usually you're going to miss something. Because there's stuff on the right and the left, and there's just places that you can kind of skip, or it's not always just like one straight line. So you could say we pass through many winding halls in order to get to the crown jewel of the Getty Museum, the Monet exhibit. Okay, that fits. So halls. So when I think of halls, I usually think of walls. So a lot of times, a hall has walls. right? A hall has walls. Okay, so now, if you can think of, like, if you haul dirt, so the construction crew had to haul 1 ton of dirt across town late last night, right? Because a lot of times these construction crews work evenings, and so that's sort of a time frame we can put. All right, had to haul 1 ton of dirt across town late last night. Hopefully this is helpful. These are homophones. There are a lot of them. They're a lot of fun, and hopefully that there was some good stuff in here. Thank you very much.